we're going to give a share about Chag Chanukah. And I'm going to mostly talk today about an idea that I've heard from my Abba many, many years ago. In fact, and I was looking this up in a book to try to go over the shiur. I was very, very happy to see that whoever wrote the book in the footnote mentioned that my Abba wrote this up in the shiur many, many years ago and referred to it. So it was nice for me, a nice feeling. Let's start with an introduction to today's shiur and try to understand a little bit a concept called zecher lamigdash. The Gemara in Masechet Baba Batra teaches us at the end of the third parak of Baba Batra, it teaches us that one should try to make a zecher, a churban, zecher lamigdash. One throughout their life should try to do certain things in their home, in their traditions, how they eat and how they celebrate different things, how they should always remember the Beit HaMikdash. So we're all familiar with, I think the most famous and common minhag that is associated with that is, of course, I wouldn't say a mistake, but a mistaken concept. If you ask people what's the zecher to the churban Beit HaMikdash that we always do, people will usually mention breaking the cup at a wedding. However, that is not really the original reason for breaking a cup at a wedding. The Gemara in Brachot says we do it because we want to create a certain kind of atmosphere. We don't want people to be too happy and joyful at a wedding. So we break a cup to somehow change the atmosphere. But the Gemara in Baba Batra tells us that the minhag is to put ashes on the chatan's head. At a wedding, the chatan is supposed to put ashes for Churban Beit HaMikdash. A custom, by the way, that not everyone does, but I think is common enough in weddings that keeps the law of the Gemara. However, there are other minhagim that we do. Some people, the Gemara says, it's supposed to leave a certain area in the entrance of your house and not to finish that area, to not paint it, not to zecher lachurban, zecher lamigdash, a minhag that many, many people still do today. But besides that, it's obvious that the 3 weeks and the Tisha B'Av, those are all events that remind us of the loss of not having a Beit Mikdash. And the Gemara asks for a source for this. Where does it say that you're supposed to do such a thing? And the Gemara brings the pasuk that we all know: "Im mishkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yimini." The source, this pasuk teaches us that a person should always remember the Beit HaMikdash in his life. So Chachamim made certain times in our life, in our smachot, in our yemim tovim, to remember the Churban Beit HaMikdash, to remember that we don't have a Mikdash. However, Rabbi Soloveitchik points out that there is a parallel Gemara to this in Masechet Sukkah. In Masechet Sukkah, the Gemara teaches us, and I think I mentioned this idea perhaps even in this year a few months ago. The Gemara mentions that the lulav has to be taken all 7 days in the Beit HaMikdash, and today we take it all 7 days as a zecher lamigdash. And the Gemara says, where do we know that you have to do a zecher lamigdash? And the Gemara teaches us that zecher lamigdash has to be done based upon the pasuk in the Torah, in the Tanakh, that says Sion doresh ein la. And the Gemara says, Mikan debai drisha. The Gemara learns that you have to be doresh Sion. You always have to think about Sion Yerushalayim. That's why zecher lamigdash, we carry the lulav 7 days. However, as Rabbi Soloveitchik points out, there are other mitzvot that are zecher lamigdash, like Sfirat HaOmer, perhaps. Right? We count Sfirat HaOmer today because of zecher lamigdash. Simchat B'Tosheva, Nisuch HaMayim. And Rabbi Soloveitchik says, why do we need 2 separate Gemarot with 2 separate sources to teach us that you must remember the Mikdash and the Churban? So the answer is very simple, but it's a very important one. The answer is that there are 2 different ways that Chazal teach us how to remember the Beit HaMikdash. We call it, one is zecher lachurban, and one is zecher lamigdash. They are both there in order to remind us consistently throughout our lives that we don't have a mikdash. But there are different ways of how one does that. There are some times in life when we mourn the Beit HaMikdash's loss, and there are times when we celebrate what it means to have a mikdash. Both are legitimate ways in our lives to remind us that we don't have a mikdash, but it's not just good enough to remind us that we don't have a mikdash, right? Churban might just remind us of our loss. But when we celebrate in our lives traditions like Sfirat HaOmer, Nisuch HaMayim, Simchat B'Tishrei Av, shaking the lulav, we're not just reminding ourselves that there is no mikdash, we are actually living the idea of what a mikdash would mean in our lives, which creates also a ga'agua. I don't know for a good word in English for ga'agua, by the way, right? It creates ga'aguim and kisufim to the binyan Beit HaMikdash. If we celebrate what Beit HaMikdash would be if it would be today, if we can remind ourselves and we can touch a little bit part of the traditions and customs that would have been happening if we would have a mikdash, then that can create a certain will and a feeling that we're missing the mikdash and we are yearning to build the Beit HaMikdash. So these are two methods that Chazal developed since the Churban for us to remind ourselves to relive the Beit HaMikdash. Why am I saying all this? Because I want to try to prove today a very well-known theory that a big part of the mitzvah of lighting Chanukah candles has to do with the second method of reliving the Mikdash and reminding ourselves, connecting ourselves to certain customs and traditions that existed in the times of the Mikdash. And I believe that we can prove today that when Chazal created this mitzvah called Hadlakat Nerot Chanukah, before them stood the menorah of the Mikdash. And when they went into the halachot of Chanukiah, of the Hadlakah, they were consistently being reminded of the Chanukiah or the menorah that stood in the Mikdash. And Chazal didn't want us just to perform a technical mitzvah. They wanted us to relive the mitzvah of lighting a menorah in our houses as if it's the menorah of the Mikdash. This is almost the end of the shir before I actually prove it, but the idea, I think, is a profound one, right? How does one connect to the Mikdash, to a building that existed 2,000 years ago that's so removed from who we are and what we are? So Chazal, I think, really tried in many ways to bring the Mikdash into our lives. I'm not going to talk about this. I'm just reminding ourselves that a big chunk of tefillah, I would say a big idea of ilchot tefillah is taken from the Mikdash. Right? I'll just say this really quickly, but the whole idea that we daven in the shul, which is a Mikdash me'at, the whole idea, what's a shul? A shul is an imitation of a Mikdash. A shul like the Mikdash has a mechitza, right? It's the only thing in Judaism that has a mechitza between men and women. Ezrat Nashim is taken from the Mikdash. It's that simple, right? The idea of the parochet and the aron and the sefer Torah. These are the bima, which is the mizbeach, the kohen, which is the chazan. All the structure, the minhagim and the customs and traditions and the halachot of davening in a shul are all taken from the Mikdash. Birkat Kohanim, right? So many traditions that we do, and of course, tefillah is connected to korbanot. So when Chazal were talking and thinking about tefillah, I believe that what stood in front of them was the avodah of the kohanim, of the korbanot in Beit HaMikdash. And when the rabbis were discussing certain halachot of how to daven, when to daven, right? The times of davening are parallel to the times of the korbanot. They were always thinking of how we can somehow connect a Jew who lives far away in Chutz La'aretz, in times where there's such a gap between the Mikdash and the Jewish community. The Jew must face the Mikdash in Chutz La'aretz. He must see himself that he is now makri the korban in the Beit HaMikdash, meaning The idea was always to connect us to the avodah, the mikdash, in the world of korbanot. However, Chazal also wished to remind us of the avodah of the menorah, and that is where Chanukah comes in. Chag Chanukah is a reminder that the avodah and the mikdash was not just in the world of korbanot, but also in hadlakat ha-menorah, and that's where our story comes in of Chag Chanukah. And I sent out a source sheet, but I will try to put it up now again so everyone can see it. For those who don't have it, 1 second. Sorry, I apologize. I rushed. I don't think we got it. It'll take me 1 second to get it. Here we are. This should be it. Here we go. And I will do now share. And we should have it up now. Here we go. Okay, I hope everyone can see it. I'll make it a little bit bigger. I hope people can see it now. Okay. We'll start with the main, as I said, the main idea, without talking halacha right now, the main idea we can see of one of the main ideas, because obviously Pirsum Hanes is a big piece. We'll talk about it maybe a bit later, Pirsum Hanes of Chanukah. But already in this famous Ramban, we see this idea. In the beginning of Baalotcha, the psukim that we're going to read at the last day of Chanukah, the Mefarshim all asks, why is the Torah in the beginning of Baalotcha, which teaches us that Aaron HaKohen must light the menorah, why is that written in the Torah right after Chanukah of the Nisi'im? Each Nasi, each Shevet had to bring Bechanukat HaMishkan, had to bring korbanot, the parasha that we read every day of Chanukah, and then it tells us about Baalotcha. So Rashi famously quotes, "Lefi shikshara Aaron Chanukat HaNisi'im, chasha da'ato shelo hayam b'Chanukah lohu v'lo shivto." The only tribe that did not give a matana was Shevet Levi. Amar lo Kadosh Baruch Hu chayecha shecha gdola mishelcha mishelahem she'ata madlik umetiv et hanirot boker va'erev. Okay, this is some kind of prize for Aaron HaKohen that did not give a matana during the Chanukat HaMishkan, that he will be given a avodah in the Mishkan that will be every day, not just once in the beginning. However, the Ramban quotes an alternative midrash, which tells us, no, the reason for Aaron being told to light the menorah, and by the way, this seems to be a thing that is taken more seriously that we're makpid to read this. We're makpid to read the beginning of the right. It says, "V'ra'iti od b'ilamdeinu v'chem midash rabba amar l'Akadosh Baruch Hu l'Moshe lech emor le'Aaron al titzareh ligdolam yizot ata muchan akol banot kol zman shebet hamikdash kayam hen noagim aval haneirot le'olam el mul pnei hanorah ya'iru." The menorah is always lit. Kol habrachot shenatati lecha levarech et bnei enan betilim le'olam. How can that be? Of course the batel. They're batel when the Beit HaMikdash will be destroyed. However, the Midrash says, "Hinei davar yaduach she'en Beit HaMikdash kayam, ve'hakorbanot betelim pnei churbano, af hanerot betelot. אבל לא רמזו אלא לנרות חנוכת חשמונאי שהיא נוהגת אף לאחר חורבן בגלותנו. וכן ברכת כהנים הסמוכה נוהגת לעולם." So this midrash clearly states that when the Baruch Hu, as if is hinting to Aaron already at the time, that when he's lighting the menorah, this menorah will continue to be lit throughout the generations, le'olam. Even when Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, Jews will still be lighting the menorah through Chag Chanukah. So it seems very clear from this midrash that a big part of lighting the Chanukiah has to do with the menorah of the Mikdash. And as we'll soon see, this is a motif within the smallest halachot. I don't know if people have seen should be careful here, but I don't know if people have seen, there was a very, very funny skit a few years ago going around. What would happen if there would be halacha to in Judaism, if having a Christmas tree would be halacha in Jewish tradition. Someone made a funny skit about this, how you would have a whole masechet about how the tree has to be, what color it has to be, how you cut the tree down, how long it has to stay, what the height of the tree has to be, right? All the details of as if kivyachol such a halacha would exist. So we know that in Chod Chanukah, it's not just enough that we have the mitzvah to light the Chanukah, but there are very specific details, how we light from right to left, left to right, where we position the Chanukah, how long we have to light, where, right, all the details. So we're going to prove now that in all these details, the Chachamim had in front of them the menorah of the Mikdash. Let's start with a very famous sugya. And by the way, I think this is a great preparation for Chanukah. Besides the idea that we're talking about, it will be a shir that will be going through many, many of the details and halachot of Chanukah, and it just brings them all together. And I think it's a good preparation for us as we enter Chanukah. The Mishnah, the Gemara tells us, I'm reading from the sheet in front of you on the computer. Mar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Asi, the following: Asul le'altzot ma'ot keneged ner Chanukah. We're not allowed. The Gemara says you're not allowed to use the light of the menorah of Chanukah to check our coins. If the person has to check the different coins he has in his pocket. When I told this before Shmuel, Amarli, ner kedusha yeshba. Is it possible that a ner has any type of kedusha? Why couldn't you? There's nothing kadosh about ner Chanukah. Now, maskitli Rav Yosef, I'll explain in a second. He says, Rav Yosef says, I don't understand. Why do you think that there's a correlation between the Isur to use Chanukah light for your secular usage? Why is that connected to the question whether or not there's kedusha in the oil of the Chanukah? Just like no one thinks that blood of an animal that we shecht have kedusha, and yet it says in the Torah, "B'shafach v'chisa, b'meh shafach yichaseh, shelo chasenu baragel, shelo yu mitzvot b'ziyot alav." The Gemara says that when a person shechts an animal that has to have kisui hadam, you have to cover the blood for a chicken, you have to cover the blood, and for a chaya. So you shouldn't cover the blood with your foot. Why? Because it's not very. It shows that you don't really. It shows bizayon. It shows that you're regarding this mitzvah. You're disrespecting the mitzvah by just using your foot to scatter the earth on the blood, and therefore do it in a more respectful way. So the Gemara says, what? Does anyone think that the reason for this halacha is because there's kedusha in the blood? No, everyone knows that the reason is shelo yu mitzvot b'ziyot alav. Right? The Gemara says it's a way to show that you're not mevazeh, that you're not disrespecting the mitzvah, so you do it in a respectful way. The same goes with Chanukah. The Chanukah has no kedusha in it. However, the Gemara says you shouldn't use it for checking your coins because that shows disrespect to the ner of Chanukah. So there's no kedusha, according to this Gemara, to the oil of Chanukah of a Chanukah. Now the truth is there shouldn't be any kedusha because Chanukah is a din d'Rabbanan, and I'll explain. There's a very famous. It's a mamash, a world famous Netivot HaMishpat in the yeshiva world. They talk about the Netivot HaMishpat. It's chiddush regarding mitzvot d'Rabbanan. The Netivot says that there's a big difference between mitzvot d'oraita and mitzvot d'Rabbanan. What's the difference? He says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Torah can tell us not to eat a piece of meat, let's say a chazir. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu says this chazir, there's an Isur in the chefza, there's an Isur in the meat itself. And there's something problematic with the meat called chazir, you're not allowed to eat it. However, says in Netivot, Chachamim, when they make up Isurim, they don't have the power to make meat aser. Because Kadosh Baruch Hu said in this case, the meat is mutter. So the meat itself, the physical meat is mutter. Chachamim don't have a power to change the reality of the meat. This is a machloket, which I don't want to talk about right now. It's philosophical machloket. There's a whole book written about this question by Avi Sagi from Tel Aviv University. I don't want to go into this right now about what the koch of Chazal is, but the chiddush of the Netivot is that when Chachamim come along and tell us that there's an Isur, it's an Isur on the Gavra. It's Isur on the person rather than Isur on the Chefza. Chachamim can come along and tell me, you, we, us, we can eat this meat. This meat may be kosher, but the Chachamim say, you can't eat it. So the Netivot says, Chachamim's Isurim are limited to the Gavra, not to the Chefza, while the Torah can make Isurim on the Chefza. That's the koch of the Torah, which is not Chachamim. Now, this might be connected to what I'm saying right now, that the Gemara says there's no Kedusha in the Ner Chanukah. Why? Because with all due respect, Chachamim are the ones who told us to light Chanukiah on Chanukah, and therefore there's no Kedusha in what Chachamim make up. The Chachamim can tell us what to do, but they can't create Kedusha into something. However, why is it problematic? Why is it problematic? Because every night of Chanukiah, most Jewish homes, after they light the Chanukah candles, they all sing a song. I'm not going to sing it for you, don't worry, but we all say, Hanerot halalu kodeshem, ve'ein lanu reshut lihishtamesh behem, ela lirotam bilvad. We seem to be going against the Gemara. The Gemara says that the reason why we can't use Chanukiah light for other purposes is because we have no because there's kedusha. The Gemara says because it's bizuyot. It's disrespectful. And yet when we sing our song, when we say that famous poem, we say Hanerot halalu kodeshem. We actually almost go against this Gemara and argue that there is kedusha in the Ner Chanukah. And by the way, this also creates certain minhagim that people have, that when the wicks are finished and we have leftover oil, can anyone tell me what their minhag is to do with the leftover oil? I wonder, what do people do? They're different minhagim. Anyone? Leftover oil. Does anyone? What do people do with it? Anyone want to yell, scream out?
Latkes.
Latkes.
Yeah, they burn it all. They burn it all.
Burn it all. Why? Why do you burn it all?
Because they say it's kedusha, so therefore you want to get rid of it.
Oh, yeah, fair. So some people say you can't throw it in the garbage. Now this goes into a famous sugya, Masechet Megillah. The Gemara Masechet Megillah differentiates between tashmishay kedusha and tashmish mitzvah. The Gemara says that anything that has kedusha in it cannot be thrown in the garbage, like tefillin, mezuzah, sefer Torah. But tzitzit, shofar, lulav, the Gemara says have no kedusha in them, and when you're finished, they can be thrown in the garbage. So if you say that the Ner Chanukah have kedusha in it, if the oil, the leftover oil, actually has kedusha in it, then theoretically you would have to, like someone just said, you have to burn it. You can't just throw it in. You can't chuck it in the garbage. The leftover oil. And by the way, almost everyone has leftover oil at the end, right? They don't always burn until the end. So you have leftover oil, and according to this, is it like lulav and shofar they can just throw in the garbage, or is it like tefillin and sefer Torah, they have to like do geniza or burn it like what we do today. So the minhag that we do today seems to indicate that we hold that kedusha, but that's against the Gemara. Where do we get this idea from that there's kedusha? So the answer, of course, has to be that the reason why we actually associate some level of kedusha is because we imagine to ourselves that the Ner Chanukah is coming from the Migdash. And when Chazal created the Ner Chanukah, they as if we're imitating in some way the Ner of the Menorah. And the Ner Menorah, of course, has Kedusha in it, comes from the Migdash. So it's true that it's not real Kedusha, but it's like Kedusha. We play the game as it, to say that we associate some level of Kedusha to our Chanukah, to our oil, because it derives originally from the menorah of the Mikdash. And we can see this consistently, how this comes up in different sources. And the one who says this very clearly is the Baal HaMaor. The Baal HaMaor, Rabbeinu Zrachia Halevi in Masechet Shabbat, Sugya that talks about Ner Chanukah, really on the quotes the following opinion, and this is he's relating to the Gemara, which continues talking about our question whether or not you're allowed to use the Chanukah, the Or of the Chanukah. I'll just read it really quickly. The Gemara Masechet Shabbat says, Amar Rav Huna, Tilot ushmanim she'amru chamim eid madlikin ben Shabbat. We all know that the Bemeh Madlikin, the chapter of Bemeh Madlikin that we say every Friday night, is the same chapter that talks about Chanukah. But that's a very famous question. Why is there no Masechet Chanukah? Why are the laws of Chanukah mentioned in Masechet Shabbat as a afterthought rather than being given its own Masechet in Mishnayot, in Gemara? So there are different. Some people say that it's because Chazal didn't like the Chashmonaim so much and they tried to hide them a little bit. There are different theories why this happened. Nevertheless, this appears in Masechet Shabbat, and the Gemara compares between the oils and wicks that are mentioned in regarding Masechet Shabbat that we light Friday night to the lights at the oils and wicks that we light on Chanukah. And there's a machloket whether or not they have the same rule that you can't use them or not. And the Gemara says that this has to do with the question whether or not kavta zakukla, and regarding another question, mutar lishtamesh le'ora. I mean, there are two different halachas here. Kavta zakukla is the question, what happens if the Chanukah light goes out? Let's say I put a lot of oil in and it's supposed to light for 2 hours, and after 10 minutes it goes out. Do I have to relight the candle? Or perhaps I already did the mitzvah by lighting the Chanukah. That's one question. The second question is, mutar lishtamesh le'ora or not? Are you allowed to use, as we just discussed a second ago, are we allowed to use the Chanukah candle for other purposes, both on Shabbat and on Yom Chol? So the Gemara here has three different opinions about this and explains, I'm not going to go into the whole sugya right now, and explains that the different opinions of the Gemara all go back to these two questions, whether or not I have to relight the Chanukah after, if it goes out early, whether or not you're allowed to read by it on Shabbat, and I might Michal Shabbat by it or not. These are questions that the Gemara discusses. And the Baal HaMaor explains that part of this question, part of these dilemmas, have to do with how much do we really compare the Ner Chanukah to the Ner of the Menorah of the Mikdash. And he says, Leman de'amar, asur lishtamesh le'ora shel Ner Chanukah kol tashmish b'mashma. Afilu tashmish de mitzvah b'tashmish kedusha. Meaning when we said you can't use the light of the Chanukah for any purpose, we meant any purpose, even to learn, even tashmish al kedusha. Why? Mishum de kasavar kivan shem zecher lanerot v'lashemen shel heichal asurotem be'anaa kol ikar afilu likro b'sefer v'afilu l'sudat Shabbat u'sudat mitzvah. So he says that the opinion that's the most machmir opinion, as I said, there's a machloket about this, but the most machmir opinion, and it's the opinion that we really adopt, that you're not allowed to use it for any purpose. And by the way, the yesod of a shamish, the whole idea of having a shamish lit, is because if you by mistake have any usage of your ner Chanukah, you can always somehow argue that it's used by the shamish. Says the Baal HaMaor, has to do with this opinion that we compare the Ner Chanukah to the Ner Mikdash. It has Kedusha in it, and you're not allowed any Hana'ah the same way you're not allowed any Hana'ah from the Ner of the Mikdash. And this is also repeated beautifully by the Meiri. The Meiri beautifully repeats the idea of the Razah, of the Rabbi Aviad Tavori, Zeh shebi'arnu. שאסור להשתמש לאורה, פירושו בכל תשמיש, אפילו תשמיש של מצווה, the same idea, and I'm just skipping a little bit, וכל שמשתמש במצווה זו לאורה, מראה עצמו כמי שאינו חביבה לו. Right? It's not respectful at this point. ולא יתירו הדלקה מנר לנר, right? That's also halacha, that you're not allowed to light if a candle goes out, you're not allowed to use another candle to light that candle. Ela mipnei she'ota mitzvah be'atzma. ומה שאמרו שאסור להרצות מעות תאורה של חנוכה, לא צריכה אלא מתוך שהוא עיון קל נעשה מרחוק, והייתי סבור להתיר. הוא בא ולימד שאף בזה יש ביזוי מצווה. Right? So he says all these opinions he's explaining, it's not mechubad, it's not respectful, you're showing that that's not important, all what we said before. Then he brings our idea. Yesh ba'im ba'mitam isur hana'a v'kedusha gumura. Meaning until now, we thought that it was just bizui mitzvah. However, says the Meiri, like the Razah, there are those who argue that there's another level here, that we actually associate a level of kedusha to the candles. הועיל והן זכר לנרות להשם הנאכל יקצו מדעתו לגמרי. והרי הם כנוי סוכה ועדה של מצווה. ולא עוד, אלא שמפריזים על מידותיהם לאסור בענה כל שבין אף לאחר מצוותן. That's what we said before, that even when it's over, the minhag is to not throw away the oil to the garbage. Like we said, this really proves this opinion, that it's not just like a vort, it's not like but we mamish attach some level of kedusha to the ner Chanukah, more than we do to a lulav even, or tzitzis, that after the mitzvah is finished, they have nothing, no kedusha in them. Ner Chanukah, we associate a level of kedusha because it's derived from the Beit HaMikdash. So by the way, if that's really true, then the shita of the Netivot, right, is questioned here, because according to the Netivot, we don't associate any kedusha to D'Rabbanan. Here might be an exception, that if it's built upon a D'Oraita, we can associate even a level of kedusha to it. Let's go on to another question that the Gemara asks, which is a famous chakira in the Gemara, which is connected to the question before about whether or not you have to relight the candle after it goes out. Why not? This is connected to another question. The Gemara asks, Hadlaka osa mitzvah or hanacha osa mitzvah? That's a famous question. Like I said before, I just think this is a great opportunity to go through briefly many questions on halachot of Chanukah. They all come together. It's a great preparation for Chanukah. This is a famous question, whether or not the mitzvah is to light the Chanukiah or is to position it in the right place. The biggest nafkamina, of course, is what happens if I light the Chanukiah in a place where I'm not supposed to, because there's no pirsum hanes there. Can I just after I lit it, can I then pick it up and move it outside by the door? If we say hadlaka osa mitzvah, then I would not be allowed to. But if I say, if hadlaka osa mitzvah, you have to light it where you have to position it, and therefore you have to extinguish it and light it again. If you say hanacha osa mitzvah, then theoretically I don't care where you light the Chanukiah, as long as you position it hanacha osa mitzvah, by positioning it by the right place, that is performing the mitzvah. That's a famous question in the Gemara in Shabbat, and it has to do with the question of kavta zakukla, because kavta zakukla, we said a second ago, means that if the Chanukiah is extinguished after a few minutes, it could be that if hadlaka osa mitzvah, you did the mitzvah, you lit the Chanukiah. So therefore, if it goes out, maybe you're not to light it again. But if hanacha osa mitzvah, then I have to have it lit. Could be that you have to relight it. Anyway, what is behind this question? Rashi explains that this has to do perhaps with our question. Rashi says, "Iya mitzvah shechanukah tluya ba'adlaka madlikin b'de'ashkechan b'menorah." Rashi associates and connects this question with the menorah of the Mikdash. Once again, this question also comes up regarding the menorah of the Mikdash, whether or not hanacha osa mitzvah or hadlaka osa mitzvah. I'm not going to go to the whole sugya there, but that is a parallel discussion in the menorah, and Rashi explains that part of the dilemma, part of the debate of the Gemara regarding Chanukiah takes us back to the menorah of the Mikdash as well. So again, you see that in the back of Chazal's minds seems to be this question. I would like to now talk about the sugya of a bracha, the bracha that we make on the Chanukiah, and again show that this has to do with that has to do with the Beit HaMikdash. We know that on Chag Chanukah, on the Chanukah, we make two brachot, three the first night, Shechian and put on the side, and the Gemara says, Amar Rav Chia bar Rav Ashi Amar Rav, Hamadlik ner Chanukah tzarich levarech. Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar, Haroeh ner Chanukah tzarich levarech. Amar Rav Yu, right? Rabbi Yirmiyah says, if you see ner Chanukah, you have to make a bracha, which I'm not going to go into that sugya. That's a very famous discussion about She'asa Nisim, whether or not you make that. That's not our topic right now. Amar Rav Yehuda, Yom Rishon mevarech shtayim, umadlik mevarech shalosh shechian. Kan ve'elach madlik mevarech shtayim, veroeh mevarech achat. Ma'im me'ed zman, we don't make a shechian. Why don't we make? What about She'asa Nisim? Why do we make it every night? The Gemara says, Nes kol yomei ita. Every day there was an addition miracle added to the Chanukah, the Nes of Pach Shemen. So every day a miracle occurs, we make She'asa Nisim. Now the Gemara says, Mai mevarech asher kiddushon zav tzvan nalik ner. Some people say Shel Chanukah, some people say Chanukah without the word Shel. Okay. Then the Gemara goes, Veichan v'tzivanu. Famous Gemara. How can you say Ashisham Tzav v'tzivanu when it's the Rabbanan? So the Gemara suggests two possibilities. Rav Avi Amar lo tasur. The Torah says you have to listen to Chachamim. The Torah says whatever they tell you, left or right, you got to follow Chachamim. So you see that for every D'Rabbanan, there's almost a D'Oraita in the background, which of course is a famous Machloket Rambam said from Mitzvot. I'm not going to go into this right now. The famous Machloket, the Ramban attacks the Rambam, that according to the Rambam, it seems that every D'Rabbanan is D'Oraita, and therefore why is every Safek D'Rabbanan, every Safek D'Oraita, according to the Rambam, is the Chumrah? Why is every Safek D'Rabbanan the Kula, if everything is D'Oraita? That's a famous question, which I'm not going to right now. Rav Nechemia Amar Shal Avicha v'yagetcha zikinecha v'yomru lach. Rav Nechemia had an alternative pasuk that teaches me that you have to listen to the rabbis from Parashat Ha'azinu. On one hand, this pasuk is better because it's a mitzvat aseh, shal avicha v'yagedcha, dikinecha v'yomrulach. It's in the positive way. Listen what they have to say, rather than lo tasur is in the negative. Don't walk off the path. Don't stray off the path of Chazal. Here it's more in the positive, but it's also problematic because Shal Avicha V'Yagetcha is talking about Parashat Ha'azinu, which is more of it's not really a halachic discussion. It's more of a shira, so a little bit problematic. Anyway, nevertheless, we have here a source that teaches us that behind every D'Rabbanan is a D'Oraita, and therefore B'tzivanu, when we say B'tzivanu, we can somehow associate B'tzivanu with Akash Baruch Hu in the Torah. Okay, that's the famous Gemara in Masechet Shabbat regarding the bracha. However, if we skip the Masechet Sukkah, where it's a parallel Gemara, in the sense that it also discusses a bracha on a D'Rabbanan, the Gemara here says that mitzvah lulav kol shiva in the Mikdash, but outside the Mikdash, Yom Rishon mitzvat lulav, mikan va'elach mitzvat zekenim. The Gemara says that from the second day, it's only a mitzvat zekenim. What does that mean, mitzvat zekenim? What does that mean? And you'll see, by the way, that the Gemara connects Ner Chanukah to this, right? I'm just showing you Amar Rav Chia bar Rav Ashi Amar Rav Hamadlik Ner Chanukah tzarich levarech. The Gemara here is talking about making brachot on D'Rabbanan, Ner Chanukah and Ner Migdash. Now, according to what we said before, I just want to make sure that everyone's remembered what I said before, which is both Ner Chanukah and carrying a lulav for 7 days are connected, we said, because they both are a zecher LaMikdash. And I'll just put on the side, not all zecher LaMikdashes get brachot. Right? We know that korech is a zecher LaMikdash. There's no bracha on korech. Sfirat HaOmer is a zecher LaMikdash. It has a bracha. And this is a good question. Which zecher LaMikdashes get brachas, which don't? But the Gemara here says that both Ner Chanukah and lulav get a bracha. Okay, so now let's go back to the Gemara. The Gemara says, what does it mean? Mikan, Rashi says, what does it mean? Mikan ve'elach mitzvat zikenim. Listen to this. Rashi says that Rabbi Shua ben Levi, right, who we just quoted here, when he says Mikan ve'elach mitzvat zikenim, he's coming to argue the Rabbanan lo bai bracha. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Do you hear that? Do you hear that? That's amazing. Rashi says that Rabbi Shua ben Levi holds that there's no bracha for lulav on the rest of the days. Why? It's only the Rabbanan. And there's a machloket if the Rabbanans get a bracha. However, if you look at the parallel Yerushalmi, this Gemara, it seems that this Gemara is arguing with Rashi's pshat. Why? Because here it says very explicitly, the Gemara asks, Ketzad mevachim al ner Chanukah, Rav Amar, Baruch Ata Hashem, right? Al mitzvat hadlakat ner Chanukah, by the way. Interesting, right? We say lehadlik ner Chanukah, and here the language is al mitzvat hadlaka. We'll get back to that in a second. When do we say al and when we say le? And the Gemara here says, al lulav, we make a bracha, al nitlat lulav, al Chanukah, al mitzvat hadlakat ner Chanukah. And then the Gemara explains, Hakol modim b'yom tov harishon, shu omer al nitlat lulav. What's the machloket? Bishar yamin, the rest of the days. Rabbi Yochanan amar al nitlat lulav, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi al mitzvat zikenim. Now you remember Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi? That was the same Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi in the Bavli in Sukkah, who said mitzvat zikenim. The phrase mitzvat zikenim here and the phrase mitzvat zikenim appears also here. What's the difference? Here in the Yerushalmi, the Gemara says that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says that is the phrase that you use in the bracha. According to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, on the second day of Sukkot, when you shake a lulav, you make a bracha. Baruch Ata Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, asher shomta v'tzivanu al mitzvat zikenim. So Rashi, when he read the Bavli of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi that says mitzvat zikenim, he probably didn't see the Yerushalmi, because he interpreted Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi as if saying mitzvat zikenim means no bracha at all, while the Yerushalmi explicitly said that the phrase al mitzvat zikenim, according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, means that that's the nusach of the bracha. So what's the machloket here? What's the machloket according to the Yerushalmi? The machloket seems to be what is the right phrase that you use when you make a bracha on D'Rabbanan. Do you say the second day, al nitlat lulav, like you said on the first day, or is there a different nusach on a mitzvah D'Rabbanan, al mitzvah zikenim? Right? I'll tell you, I don't remember if I said this once before. My father has a letter in which he wrote to Rav Shechter. They were chabrutzas in YU, and they argued about the pshat of this Yerushalmi. Rav Shechter explained, I think, quite simply, that this machloket is what is the nusach of a bracha? Is the nusach of a bracha on the chetza or the gavra? Right? I'll explain. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'll go again. The machloket is whether or not the nusach of bracha is in the ma'aseh mitzvah or kiyum mitzvah. I'll explain. In the world of mitzvot, Rabbi Soloveitchik developed this idea in many places that certain mitzvot, the bracha and the mitzvah of is composed of two elements. One is the ma'aseh of the mitzvah, and one is the kiyum of the mitzvah. For example, shaking lulav has the same. The ma'aseh, the action is to shake lulav, and the kiyum, the fulfillment, is shaking the lulav. But there are certain mitzvot, Rabbi Soloveitchik argues, that there might be a gap between the action and what I'm fulfilling. Rabbi Soloveitchik said famously this idea in Chot Tshuva. In the Ala Tshuva, it's printed this idea that Rabbi Soloveitchik explains doing tshuva has a gap between the ma'aseh and the kiyum. The ma'aseh has to do vidui. The kiyum is tshuva. The Rav said this about tefillah. The ma'aseh of tefillah is li'itpalel, and the kiyum is avodat Hashem. Kriyat Shema might be the same. The ma'aseh to say Kriyat Shema, the kiyum is kabbalat umuchut shamayim. This might be also, the Rav talks about this about avelus. There's a ma'aseh avelus to sit on the floor and to mourn, but the kiyum is balev. Rabbi Savage developed this idea very much. It could very well be that the machloket here is what is the nusach of a bracha on a derabana. The first day of Sukkot, the ma'aseh mitzvah is to shake a lulav, and the kiyum is to shake a lulav. So you make a bracha al dlat lulav. But the second day of Sukkot, who told you to shake a lulav? Chachamim. So the ma'aseh mitzvah is to shake a lulav. But what are you fulfilling? Lo tasur. The mitzvah that you're fulfilling is listening to Chachamim, right? Chachamim told you to shake lulav. What mitzvah? What am I fulfilling? I'm fulfilling the mitzvah of shaking the lulav. So now the question is, what is the nusach of the bracha? Is the nusach of the bracha on the ma'aseh of shaking lulav, or is the nusach of the bracha on the kiyum listening to Chachamim? My father, though, argued that the machloket is different. Going back to the netivot that we said before. Remember the netivot said that the Rabbanans don't have Isurei Chefza, only Isurei Gavra. My father said that maybe the machloket here is not only in the world of Isurim, but in the world of mitzvot. When Chachamim make mitzvot, can they actually turn the object into a mitzvah? Meaning this branch, which yesterday was a lulav d'oraita, is a mitzvah to share. The lulav is the Torah says this lulav is a mitzvah. On the second day, Chachamim tell you to shake this branch. But is the branch itself a mitzvah? No, it's just a branch. Chachamim told you to shake this branch, which happens to be a lulav. However, it could very well be that some people think, no, Chachamim have the power to turn this lulav into a mitzvah on the second day. My father argued that that may be the machloket, whether or not al mitzvat zkenim, all Chachamim can do is telling you to shake a branch, or can you make the bracha al nitlat lulav? Chachamim have a power, unlike the netivot's idea, to say that no, there's kedusha as if there's a mitzvah in the shaking the lulav even the second day. So that's my father argued back and forth with Rav Shechter whether or not how to interpret this Yerushalmi that perhaps Rashi didn't see. But nevertheless, we have a machloket. What is the nusach of the bracha on a mitzvah derabanan? How much is a mitzvah derabanan really a mitzvah? Is it a hefza of a mitzvah or then the gavra? How far can we go? Why am I bringing all this? Not just because it's beautiful Torah, but because the nusach of the bracha of Ner Chanukah is debated. As we just saw in the Gemara, is it al or le? So the Gemara in Pesachim has a big discussion. It's more in the Rishonim, really, which brachot get al and which mitzvah get le. The Rabbeinu Tam and the Rambam argued if there's a rule and what the rule is, which brachot get al and what get le. By the way, Tosfot in Pesachim and Daf Zayin says, "Oh, I'm so confused. There are so many exceptions. I can't find a rule. It's just random. Some are al, some are le." He almost gives up. But Rabbeinu Tam, as well as Rambam, try to develop a certain system that gives us kind of direction when a bracha is al and when is le. So the Rambam says that, if you follow me in the sheet here, he talks about al birur chametz, nitlat yadayim, shchita. He says ho'il v'davar reshuten, right? He says if something is a reshut, you don't have to shecht an animal. If you want to eat meat, you have to shecht an animal. But there's no mitzvah that you have to shecht an animal. So therefore, he says, the lashon of al, it refers more to mitzvot that are reshut, because it sounds less obligated, right? That you're less obligated. Le is a language that means I'm obligated to do something. I must do it. Al is less. So the Ravid, as you can see here, let me just make it a little bit bigger because the Ravid is a little bit small. The Ravid argues with the Rambam and says, I don't understand. Kasheli al mikra megillah. why is the mitzvah al? Why, when we read the Megillah, we say al mikra Megillah, not le? Ve'im yomar kol mitzvah shemidivrem omer al. Oh, what did we say just now? We said that al is a lashon of reshut. So you can argue, says the Ravid, that all derabbanans get al, because every derabanan compared to a deoraita has some element of reshut. It's not really reshut, but it's to show you that with all due respect to Chazal, it doesn't have the same status as a deoraita. So we always use the al phrase for a bracha on a derabana. If that's true, says the Ravid, kashli ner Chanukah. Ner Chanukah, we say let. Perhaps he says because there's Mehadrin element, but then he offers the answer that I'm looking for. Inami mipnei shezu habracha hukbe'a al nerot sheba migdash shehen shel Torah lifikach asu keshel Torah. Not only the Baal HaMaor, not only the Meiri, but now the Ravid also shares with us this idea that the Ner Chanukah is based upon the Ner Migdash. And in order to show you that this Derabanan mitzvah has origins in the Deoraita world, in the sphere of Deoraita, in the sphere of the Migdash, the language, says the Ravid, perhaps that we use is a lashon that is found usually in Brachot Deoraita, the lashon of le, to remind us that this is a little bit more than a regular Derabanan. It has an origin in the world of the Migdash. And I see I don't have much time, but I'll just, two more halachot that are very clear, also take us back to the Migdash, is the famous minhag of lighting Chanukah candles in a shul. I'm sure people are aware that there's always an argument whether or not you should light the Chanukiah in a gathering, right? Make a bracha. The minhag today is that you go to a wedding. I Baruch Hashem next week 2 weddings in Chanukah, and many people light the Chanukiah in the hall. But there's a famous question whether or not you can make a bracha on a Chanukiah that's not lit in your house. This question is based upon a Machoket Rishonim for the famous minhag why we light Ner Chanukah in the shul. Because we all know that Ner Chanukah in a shul is not lit by individual. There are some people that say it's Lehotzi, the Orchim, the guests that perhaps sleep in the shul, which is something that we don't have today. No one today lives in the shul anymore. So what's the minhag based upon? So the Rishonim, there's a Machoket Rishonim. Some Rishonim say it's because of Pirsum Hanes. The mitzvah is when we have 10 people together and gather. So if that's true, by the way, then there's room to argue that you should make a bracha in any gathering, and that's why some people say it's not very common psak, but some people say that you can light a Chanukiah in a gathering and even make a bracha. However, the more common opinion is that the reason is because we are imitating, again, as we said before, lighting the Chanukiah of the Mikdash, the menorah of the Mikdash. And the reason why we light the menorah or the Chanukiah in a shul is because a shul, as we spoke about before, is the example of a model of the Mikdash, Me'at. And the same way we light in menorah in the Beit Mikdash, we light in the shul. And that also, by the way, explains the minhag of lighting it in where we light it. Some people are very makpid to light the menorah in the shul, Betzad Dromi, in the southern wall, and that has to do with the fact that the menorah in the Mikdash stood in the south part of the Beit HaMikdash, as well as the custom, by the way, to light it with 10 people, without 10 people. A lot of details to do with lighting it. By the way, the minhag, there are many shuls that light the menorah in the morning too on Chanukah. Why do we light the Chanukiah in the shul in the morning? That, of course, goes back to the Beit Mikdash, because the Beit Mikdash, the menorah was lit also in the morning and the afternoon. So this idea, this goes back to the Mikdash. This idea is connected to the Mikdash too as well. So we see that, the origins of the Chanukiah, of lighting I'll just want to add one more halacha, which I think is a very interesting one, and that will finish for today. There's an interesting discussion whether or not you can light a Chanukah with a litric. Something that would be very, people that fly and travel, if they could use electricity to light the Chanukah, would solve problems for some of us, especially if we got to leave the house and you're afraid of a fire hazard. However, unlike Shabbat candle, unlike Ner Havdalah, most poskim do not permit lighting Chanukah with LED lights or any electricity. And I have in front of me here, if anybody's interested, there's an article in Tchumen, number 9. There's a very good article here that goes through all the tshuvot, and there are a lot of them, written in the 20th century, why you can't use electricity for Ner Chanukah. And Rabbi Aviad and many other poskim argue that because it has to be like the Migdash, that there has to be oil, there has to be a ptil, it has to be shemen. So you see that even a very practical nowadays question that has to do with electricity, you can see that even today we have in our mind the Migdash, lights of the Migdash, that prevents us from allowing us to light electricity nowadays because of the association with the Migdash. I just want to end by saying that there are certain halachot that are different, obviously, between the menorah that we light today and the menorah of the Mikdash. First of all, of course, I'm sure people, if I was giving a regular shir, people would be shouting out to me, of course, that the menorah in the Mikdash had 7 and not 8, right? Had 3 on each side, but we have 4 on each side. So that, of course, is a major difference in the number of candles. But some people suggest that that's exactly the reason why there's a difference, because we don't want to associate, we don't want to say that the menorah that we light in our house is actually the Beis HaMikdash, because you're not allowed to do that. It's only in the Beis HaMikdash can you really light the menorah. Our Chanukah, with all what we discussed today, is only a zecher and not the menorah itself. So we have to show there's a difference between our Chanukah and the menorah. But I think that we proved today that that when Chazal established and Hilchot Chanukah, Hilchot Hadlakat HaMenorah, they had in their mind the Hilchot Menorah of the Beit HaMikdash, and they wanted us to connect it, to associate it, that even throughout the centuries, when there's no Mikdash, every Jew should somehow turn his house into Mikdash Me'at by bringing the light of the menorah into our houses, Bimei Cheshchat HaGalut, that we should always have a zecher LaMikdash, remind ourselves to create a ga'agua and a yearning to the Beit HaMikdash, Sheyibnei Beit HaMikdash B'Rabbi Yameinu, Amen. Thank you, everyone.
Question. We have time for questions.
Yeah, we have time for questions. Thank you. Thank you. I always wanted to finish early before questions. Yes, Bakasha.
All right. I maybe tangentially, I just want to maybe go back to this idea of the bracha nusach of al mitzvat, whatever, because I can think of at least 3 examples where, in fact, we say both. We use the le and also the al. So if you want, so when you put on tefillin, right, you say le haniach tefillin, and then you say the second bracha is al mitzvah tefillin. When you eat matzah, if I remember correctly, I think the first bracha is motzi lechem, and then the next is al mitzvat, al achilat matzah, and by tzitzis, maybe it's the reverse, but actually I learned with your father, Allah Shalom, that when you put on tzitzis in the morning, the beged on your body, it's al mitzvat tzitzit, because the real tzitzit is the putting on of the talis. So therefore you say le hitat. So those 3 examples, and maybe there are more, you've got both brachot. One, and I guess, so the question is, it seems that the one where you're saying al mitzvah is maybe subservient to the other, or exactly how does that nusach
Right.
really
So,
fit?
okay. So first of all, I'm not going to give I'm happy another time to give a shir about these rules. As I said, there's a big machloket rishonim. But just to respond to what you said, you just mixed many different types of brachot. You mentioned brachas ha-mitzvah, brachas ha-nanin, and perhaps brachas ha-shevach, because the bracha of hamotzi, of course, is the brachas ha-nanin, while the first bracha of tefillin is for sure brachas ha-mitzvah, while the second bracha on tefillin, according to many, might be a brachas ha-shevach. Rabbi Soloveitchik and both the Aruch HaShulchan argue that the bracha al mitzvah tefillin is not a brachas ha-mitzvah. So it's a brachas ha-shevach. That's why I say Baruch Shem Cholam Ve'ed. And that's why Shulchan Aruch actually doesn't even bring that bracha, and Sfardim and don't say that bracha at all. So it could be that there's a difference between the bracha and the mitzvah, brachas and the shevach. So the le and the al is different. And as I said to you before, the Rishonim really try to make sense of when we say le, when we say al. As you saw, you can go back to the Rambam and the Raiva on the sheet that I gave you. You'll see that they themselves are a bit confused about certain exceptions to certain rules, and like I said, some Rishonim even say they gave up and they can't find a real rule because there's too many exceptions. But this is a share of itself that you're right, that it's not very clear if there's a 100% rule when we say al and when we say le. But it really is a whole big discussion, which I'm not going to go into right now.
I just want to say one thing.
Phil.
Your father would have been proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Could I just quickly ask, Rabbi Aviad said we couldn't use electricity for the Nerod because it needs to be oil like in the Beit HaMikdash. So
Correct.
How do we get away with candles?
Oh, so some people don't like candles either. Some people say that you're right, that mechatchila you should use oil, because oil in the Beit HaMikdash and the Shemen Zayit. Why do we use Shemen Zayit? Because it goes back to Beit HaMikdash. That just proves our theory even more. So by the way, some people say that if you're stuck, so you can use. But if I'm not mistaken, when people say it's okay, a candle is better because a candle when
It becomes liquid.
It becomes liquid, right? It becomes like and there is a wick. There is a wick. And the sha'ava, help me out, sha'ava, the sha'ava in English, no, sha'ava, what a candle is made out of, sha'ava is
Wax.
Wax.
Thank you. The wax melts, so it's like an oil, but I mean, like I said, if you open this article, it's a very good article. He has I'll show you here. You have a table. I don't know if you can see. He goes through all the different types of he says oil, LED, regular light, what you gain, what you don't gain by using each. He says, is there fire, is there heat, is there oil, is there a wick? And therefore he says the best way to make sure that you light Chanukah, the best way is to use oil and a wick, because that really covers all the different opinions and of lighting Chanukah.
If they had LEDs then, they would have used them because it was more economical for and better for the environment.
But then there would be no miracle, right? There would be no Chanukah.
Who says
There's
LEDs are a miracle in themselves? Everything is a miracle. Why does LED burn and why vinegar burn or oil burn?
these things are a zecher. There's a difference. We are not lighting the menorah of the Beis HaMikdash. So that's why we have 8 rather than 7. Because with all respect, we love it the Beis HaMikdash and it's holy, and we are not replacing it, but we're reminded of it. And I think that's a very important distinction.
Yeah. Look, there are certain differences. Like I said before, I didn't really mention them. There are, I mean, even in Hanachal Mitzvah, Kavtaz Kukla, there are actually differences between the menorah of the Mikdash the menorah that we light in our houses. So some people actually go into the. Some people want to show that in the areas that there is a difference. There's a reason for these differences, because the Mikdash and our houses are a little bit different. I saw them people write about this. By the way, they say that there's another, in the world of Machshava, there's another connection between both, which is lighting outside to the world. Meaning, in both cases, we want the light in our homes to shine out to the world. And there's a famous discussion about, is Ner Chanukah really for non-Jews as well, right? If you live in a non-Jewish area, and the Presuma Nisa is to whom? Is to ourselves, is to our Jewish community, or perhaps it's even to the non-Jewish community, right? So one could argue that the menorah of it says in the Midrash that the menorah of the Mikdash was L'kol Ba'ei Olam. It actually says that the menorah of the Midrash was edut for the entire world. So if you want to say that, then you can argue that the Presuma Nisa of Chanukah has also a certain element of being, something that reaches out to the entire world and not just to the Jewish community. That's already taking it a little bit, to the next level of the meaning of it. And obviously, I didn't talk about this, but there's also a huge element of Presuma Nes, right? I didn't talk about that today, meaning the fact that we established that the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah is based a lot on Ner Mikdash doesn't take away that it's also established on Presuma Nes, right? The idea that we add a candle every day, like we said before, is the zecher lanes of Pach Hashem. And so there's both elements. It doesn't take away one, and it's not either or, but rather both of them come together within the mitzvah of lighting Chanukah candles.
I think you don't have to go overtime anymore. Give everybody rest, and thanks very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to run to give cheer now elsewhere with my guys. Lovely to see everyone. I want to wish everyone a Chanukah Sameach, and just tell you, Phil, that the book, I'm just going to stop the recording.